On the East Coast on Sunday night. It's the second day of August. Good evening and welcome to a special edition of Tracking the Tropics. I'm CBS 17 Chief Meteorologist Wes Hohenstein in Raleigh, North Carolina. And as you know, we are tracking Tropical Storm Isaias. August has started, and August is typically when the real hurricane season starts. And we are definitely getting proof of that today with a storm just east of the Florida Peninsula that we will talk about in a second. We're also going to go up and down the East Coast. We're going to get closer to the system. From Raleigh, we're going to check in with Savannah, Georgia, to see how they're preparing and what they're worried about. Then we're going to come up to South Carolina and go to Charleston, South Carolina, and see how people are reacting there, getting ready for the system, and just what impacts are going to affect all of us up and down the East Coast. Let's start with the current conditions. As you know, we get several updates from the National Hurricane Center throughout the day. We just got the latest one at 8 o'clock Eastern. It came in just a few minutes ago. Not much has changed, and hasn't that been a consistent message that you've heard from meteorologists? Not a lot of changes with this system. It was a hurricane for a while, then it's a tropical storm. But one thing we need to pay attention to is the difference between a tropical storm and a hurricane in this case is only 5 miles per hour. So while the name might change, and the name has changed from tropical storm to hurricane, we have to remember we're only talking about 5 miles per hour. And that's not really going to affect the impacts that your area will see. But the very latest keeps winds at 70 miles per hour, gusting to 85. The pressure is down just a little, but overall 993 millibars is not an impressive pressure. Remember, the lower the pressure goes, the stronger the storm gets. And a lot of times we'll see the pressure drop, and then 3 or 6 hours later, we'll see the winds increase or the storms increase around the system. So 993 is not impressive, but technically it did go down, and it's moving north-northwest at 9 miles per hour. It's about 90 miles east-southeast, and this is over the past 12 hours, the loop that you're watching here. It's about 90 miles east-southeast of NASA, essentially where they launch, or they used to launch those space shuttles, where they currently launch rockets. It's that little tip of Florida that sticks out. So it's the center is technically about 90 miles away from that. But notice where the center is, and then notice where all the rain is. So for a time there when it was in the Atlantic and over the Caribbean, we didn't have access to radar. But now that we can see radar, I mean, we can see radar 250 miles out, but it's only north and northeast of the center of the system. That's an important story there because the system still remains very lopsided, very unorganized. That's probably why it hasn't been able to strengthen so much, is because upper level wind shear and dry air, amongst other things. We're going to talk a little bit more about that later. The visible satellite from early this morning, remember, visible satellite versus infrared. Visible, it would be like taking your iPhone up into space and just taking a picture when it's daylight out. Infrared, the satellite that you usually see, is based off temperature, cold cloud tops or warm cloud tops, and that's how we determine where the clouds are. This is just a good old-fashioned putting our eyes into space, and what you can see, look how that area north of the center just exploded. I mean, there are some intense thunderstorms, but it's not a symmetrical. We don't see an eye. So while the clouds are impressive and it kind of looks cool, it's just not a very well put together tropical system. So that's going to be a common theme in one of the things we talk about tonight. It's going to come into play in how it impacts all of us. The hurricane hunters actually are still out there tonight, even though it's only 90 miles away, and even though we've been doing this for days and days now, and it's going to make landfall most likely in the next couple of days. The better information we can continue to gather from these hurricane hunters, the better we're going to fine-tune that forecast. So they're still out there on this Sunday night. They've been pretty much flying nonstop since the system developed just a few days ago. They're going to feed a lot of that information they're collecting into the computer models. They're going to hand a lot of that information off to meteorologists all over the world. So the computer models have actually been pretty good and pretty consistent. So this is the Sunday afternoon run, and they all keep the system offshore, the center of the system, that is. Remember, that's what each one of these lines represents, where the center of that storm is going to go. Two things we look for when we're looking at these computer models. We look for the trends, which way has everything been shifting, and we look for the cluster. So we haven't seen a lot of shifting. A lot of landfalls in and around the Myrtle Beach area in northern South Carolina. But even if it doesn't make landfall there, you know how North Carolina sticks out. So a lot of them are also saying right around the state line and keeping it around I-95. So there hasn't been a whole lot of shifting, and the cluster is really over eastern North Carolina. So that hasn't changed. I mean, we've been watching these computer models for days. There hasn't been a lot of changes there. That also tells a story that there's a lot of confidence in this forecast. If the computer models were over here one time and then way over here the next, the forecast would be very uncertain, but they're right there all together, and they've been that way for a while, so there's a lot of certainty. So here's the official forecast track. We're going to go from Florida all the way up the East Coast. We're going to take you hour by hour. So this is the official track from the National Hurricane Center. All right, it's going to stay offshore most likely. All right, maybe even move a little farther offshore, which would be drastically changing where the landfall is farther up north. This is Monday morning at 10 a.m. It's going to be east of Jacksonville. Then it's going to start to really speed up, and that's going to save a lot of us on the East Coast for a disastrous flooding event. We get to Charleston. All right, either just offshore or just inland, Monday at 8 o'clock or so. We're going to go down live to Charleston here in a second, then up to near Myrtle Beach, either just offshore or maybe inland. Remember, the yellow cone tells us the center could be anywhere in this yellow cone at the given time. This is Tuesday at 1 a.m. Then we're up here over central North Carolina and eastern North Carolina, right there around the I-95 corridor. This is 6 a.m. Tuesday. And then it really takes off. It's probably going to get moving more than 30 miles an hour. It's going to be up there toward Maryland. And then as we get toward Tuesday night, so that's a long way in a short amount of time, it's going to be in and around New York City, and then headed up to Massachusetts in the early morning hours of Wednesday, and then by Wednesday night, it's up in Canada. So this thing is really going to take off. Here's the big picture of where it's going to go from right now just east of Cape Canaveral, Florida, to eventually up into Canada in about 3 days. So that's a pretty good mover. As for the rain, let's talk about that. This is our forecast model, and as you can see, the rain, a lot of it staying offshore. But then as we get toward Monday night, some of that rain could move into parts of South Carolina and North Carolina. Here we are Tuesday at 3 a.m. Some intense rain. And remember, when tropical systems come inland, a lot of times they produce tornadoes. So we'll have rain, we'll have a tornado threat. You can see a lot of heavy rain in eastern parts of Virginia, spreading up into Washington, D.C. This is Tuesday morning at 10 a.m. And then moving on to New Jersey and New York Tuesday night. And like I said, it's going to be a fast mover at this point. So yes, there's going to be some heavy rain, but because it's a fast mover, I think we'll avoid major flooding. Still a couple of inches possible. Then Tuesday night, it moves from New York through Wednesday morning on up into parts of Canada. So a fast mover, thank goodness. Here are the winds. So the yellow tropical storm force winds as we go into Monday, most of them staying offshore until Monday afternoon. Charleston and Myrtle Beach, the coastline of South Carolina, could get some tropical storm force winds, and then those tropical storm force winds, which you see here in yellow, moving Monday night in the coast of North Carolina, inland across central and eastern North Carolina in the early morning hours of Tuesday, and then continuing to head up to the Virginia, Maryland, and then on into the New Jersey area as we head into Tuesday night. So that's the big picture about what's going on. Let's get down the coast. I want to go down to Savannah right now. Our first guest tonight is Scott Robertson. He works at WSAV in Savannah, Georgia. Scott, you guys, like the rest of the East Coast, have been watching this very closely. What are you guys most concerned with down in Savannah tonight?
Well, I do want to tell you, Wes, that our mood here has improved a lot over the last 24 hours. Now, the impacts that we were expecting were going to be minimal no matter what because of how lopsided this system is. But as far as the new forecast track that has come out, things are looking much better. And our main concern is going to be along the coast. Bobby, our director, let's take a look at what we are expecting in our area. The effects would begin to be felt Monday, maybe late morning to midday, and then last on and off through the afternoon and into the evening hours as the storm is trekking along the coast. We'll have some heavy rain and some flash flooding possible pretty much along the coast. I-95 and eastward. I-95 is pretty much right along the coast here in Georgia, not very far inland at all, and really east of there is where we will be dealing with any of the possible effects. And we're not going to be talking about sustained tropical storm force winds here in our area, which is good news for us, but we could have some spots get 39 mile per hour or or greater gusts, which could be enough to knock down some trees for us, especially in some spots that do end up with some of those heavier rain bands coming in. But a big concern is going to be the rough surf, coastal flooding, beach erosion, and along with that rip currents, our beaches have already been shut down as far as people being able to go in the waters. Here's the wind gust forecast for the coastal empire of Georgia and the South Carolina low country. We have 3 counties on the South Carolina side that we follow. As we head into midday, we'll be looking at those gusts picking up upwards of 35 miles per hour or more, possibly approaching that tropical storm strength. And then as we head into the evening, as that center is going to be pretty much just due to our east, we could have those wind gusts picking up into the 40s, 44, 45 miles per hour, not out of the question. But this has come down a little bit as things have begun to trend just a little bit further off our shore, and then as we head into the overnight hours, conditions will certainly begin to improve. And as far as that rainfall forecast, it's really going to be concentrated right along the coast and closer to Charleston, Beaufort, and Hilton Head Island to have the better chance of having those highest rainfall amounts. That's where we do have the greatest flash flooding concern, and up into the Charleston area, even more rain expected. But if you're in areas more toward middle Georgia, Vidalia, Baxley, Glenville, not much rain and not much wind expected, so it's going to be very localized, and a matter of a few miles west will make all the difference with what we will be expecting with this storm.
You know, Scott, we started off by showing how massive this storm is and how intense some of the storms are, and then you show us what's going on there. This is just a case of the dry air. The upper level winds have really torn this apart, making it so lopsided, and that's why you guys are not looking at such a disastrous event.
Yeah, absolutely. We are certainly benefiting from the lopsided nature of this storm with that center and eastward, or excuse me, westward is where a lot of that dry air is, even over the Florida Peninsula. Not much rain is happening. As we head into the evening hours tonight, we could have a couple of rain bands moving in, and even when this is offshore, it is really going to be staying, everything, that active weather staying to the east of us. So much better picture than what we would be looking at if this thing was, say, 50 miles or 75 miles a little bit further to the west, closer to our coast.
Yeah, excellent point. You know, it's 90 miles east of Florida right now, the center is, and, you know, typically with a tropical system like that, the Florida coast would be getting hit with probably some strong winds and heavy rain, and, you know, you guys probably won't see that because of the lopsidedness. So how are people preparing or handling, or do people care down there? I know it's a summer weekend. You guys got beaches. What are people doing around Savannah tonight?
Yeah, in Savannah, seems like business as usual. Most of the concerns are out along the coast, where we will have the higher surf and certainly higher tides. Out on Tybee Island, even this morning, because of the onshore flow, the high tide was much higher, and the water line made it all the way up to our sand dunes. They did do a renourishment project, a 12-foot dune project over the last couple of years. They did their job today, held that water back, but it did come up about 150 to 200 yards above where the, say, the low tide line is. So a big change and certainly a concern for people. But even today, even with those concerns, people were out on the beach. We do have a view of Tybee Island right now. If we can pop that up, Bobby, there's our view for us. You can see the high surf coming in, but people are out there. You can see a couple of people there with surfboards. So really not taking it too seriously, but those waters have been pretty rough, and they are officially closed. And actually, the city of Tybee Island has been talking about imposing some fines to some people if they would be going out there on the waters, especially through the day tomorrow, because it is going to be especially dangerous as that storm is right off of our coast.
Scott, you mentioned tides, and I'll get you out of here on this. We're about ready to hit a full moon. I mean, that can make a big deal. High tide, low sea level areas around there. Are you guys worried at all about any flooding, despite the fact that you're not expecting a lot from wind and rain?
Yeah, we have been watching it pretty carefully. Of course, the low country gets its name because of the lowlands. We do have very wide variations between the high tides and the low tides here. But we're actually looking pretty good, because once the storm is going to be getting to us, that tide is going to be coming out. The full moon normally does give us higher tides. That's what helped to enhance the issues that we had today on Tybee Island. The roadways out there, the main highway from Savannah to Tybee Island, was raised up above the flood stage for for the Savannah River, which is at Fort Pulaski, which is closer to the coast downstream from downtown Savannah. Flood stage is 9.5 feet. We're expecting it to stay below that, right around 9.2 feet or so. So we're not going to be looking at major concerns with that. And even in the past, we would have issues with what would be called blue sky flooding, with the full moons having some issues. So as far as that roadway, things are looking pretty good. Main concern is going to be isolated right along the coast.
Okay, good stuff, Scott. Keep everyone safe down there. Thanks so much for joining us. That is Scott Roberts, live from WSAV down in Savannah, Georgia. So the tropical storm that we've all been trying to learn how to pronounce over the past week or so, it is the 9th named storm this season already. We are on our way to breaking more records. To talk more about that and what else is going on in the tropics, because that's not the only thing out there, let's bring in CBS 17 meteorologist Melissa Lefevre. Melissa, busy season already, and it's not even half over with.
Well, that's what I think. Both have been in Category 1. What has been different, we've had more tropical storms, but we've had more impacting the U.S. 4 of those have made landfall: Bertha, Cristobal, Faye, and yes, Hurricane Hannah there in Texas. That is the only one we've had so far. But again, Wes, I think it's just important to point out that we're talking about the history books, not needing to compare them. 2005 always going to be taking the cake, in my opinion, but it's hard to believe that, again, 2020 has already been off to such an active start, and we're continuing to shatter those records.
Yeah, and you know, we've been talking a lot about Isaias. There's actually been a couple other things way out there going on. Brief us real quick on what's been going on way out in the Atlantic that's not going to bother anyone.
Well, that's right, Wes. And again, I do want to point out, as we've been talking about the peak there, September 10th, we're just now getting into the heightened part of hurricane season, and we've been focusing all about Isaias, but we've got to talk about another system that we're going to be watching. This development here has a 40% chance of development over the next 2 days, 60% chance of development over the next 5. And you see, this is where we would typically begin to see that development. And of course, we've been talking right off there along the Florida coast, but that's something on its heels that we will be watching. And of course, you know that we're going to keep you updated both on air and online, of course, here on Tracking the Tropics. Lots going on as we're heading, again, August 2nd, I think. Hard to believe.
I know. This is normally vacation time for everyone, unless you, of course, a meteorologist. Melissa Lefevre right here in Raleigh with me at CBS 17. Thanks, Melissa. All right, let's get back down to the coast. Let's go to Charleston, South Carolina right now. Down at WCBD in Charleston, South Carolina, Rob Fowler. I think everyone who's ever been to South Carolina knows him. Rob, you have covered a lot of storms. This is such a strange, lopsided storm, but what's going on in Charleston? What's everyone down there worried about?
I'll tell you what, hearing Melissa talk about the names of the storms so far, Bertha actually made landfall here along our coast, so we've already had one landfalling storm. I thought I'd pull up a live camera, Folly Beach. If you've been to Charleston, this is the surfers' haven down here. It's called the Edge of America, and the surfers are out. The breakers are pretty high and breaking pretty far out. We know 24 hours from now, this is probably going to be a different picture. I also have a beautiful sunset. We have a camera on top of our roof, and you can see right there how gorgeous the sunset is. It's going to be different 24 hours from now. We certainly feel that way. So here is a look. I know you guys have kind of given us the lowdown, but we thought we'd kind of show you our perspective. This is, as Wes detailed a little while ago, the enhanced infrared picture. This is how you can take a picture at night. You colorize the higher, the colder cloud tops. And right here where you see the purple, that's where you have the highest, coldest clouds, usually associated with the strongest thunderstorms and the highest winds. And as the storm continues to move off to the north and northwest, you can see how Charleston in South Carolina juts out a little bit. Not as much as North Carolina, but we still have a little more of our area out into the ocean that could be impacted. This is a live look at our radar right now, and we've actually seen a couple of scattered showers that have been trying to make a run for the coast. I guess the far outer rain bands associated with Isaias as it moves off to the north and northwest. So we actually could see some showers in Charleston along our South Carolina coast by morning time as the atmosphere kind of moistens up closer to the coast. And that's what our models are indicating as we get into tonight about 10 o'clock. Then you see that onshore wind flow, that southeast wind. This is breakfast time tomorrow, and you could see potentially maybe one of those squalls that move on in. And for us, that means a pocket of heavy rain and gusty winds. This is our 11 o'clock picture in the morning. And I think for us, like many areas, it's going to be the afternoon and evening that's going to be most active as we move on into the afternoon on Monday. This is 6 o'clock. And I want to stop at 8 o'clock because this is very important for us in Charleston because our high tide tomorrow night with the full moon you guys talked about, it's going to be a little more elevated. The tide, the gravity pull is a little stronger. So if we get heavy rain at that time and we continue to see those onshore winds, that's really going to pile up that water into Charleston Harbor. And around Charleston, it can flood when you get a tide about 7 feet. That's about the level we start to see water in the roadways. Even when it's a sunny day, it doesn't have to be onshore wind or rain. You can have a sunny day and still have water in our roadways here. That's why they call us the low country. And this is 11 o'clock, and you can certainly see that most of the heavier rain would be up to our north. We do cover Georgetown County as well. That's part of our Charleston viewing area. So we're concerned about our viewers to the north in Georgetown County. Then by 2 a.m., we're going to get more of an offshore wind. We'll start to dry things out, but then that heavier rain, as you can see, moves up the coast. So rainfall totals, there's going to be a pretty good swath of rain, in some cases 2, 4, 5, maybe up to 8 inches, depending on the track of the storm. Certainly, we'll be watching that. But here's a general look at what we're expecting, some 3 to 4 inches of rain, and then back away from the coast, closer to Interstate 95, probably more like 2 to 3 inches. And wind gusts, the closer you get to the coast, obviously the potential is there for stronger winds, maybe 50 to 60 mile per hour winds along our beaches and barrier islands, and then a little farther back inland, 30 to 40. But you couple those winds with some heavy rain, the root systems and some of the trees could be weakened. We do expect some power outages because of that. And obviously, the steering, high pressure is what's brought it this far, and then the upper level winds along the coast, we hope will kind of skirt it more north and east. But we think, as Wes and Scott mentioned, there's a potential that we could see maybe a landfall just to the north of Charleston and Myrtle Beach before it does move into North Carolina. So that's our best guess. Now, going into the weekend, we had 3 different scenarios we were looking at. One would take it over Florida, and that would have brought us still some heavy rain and wind. We would be on the eastern side. We also had number 2, which kept it offshore Florida and then kind of bent around, maybe potentially making a landfall in South Carolina. And then scenario number 3 was keeping it well offshore. We're going to take 2 of those out of the mix, and we're going to stick with 2. That's the one we really felt going into the weekend would be the most likely scenario. And right now it looks like that's going to play out. But even in that scenario 2, here in Charleston area, we're looking at potentially heavy rain and wind. And this is the wind radii. And as it moves up the coast, the storm that is, the yellow, as Wes mentioned, those are the tropical storm force winds. And the orange would be 50 knot winds or 58 miles an hour. This is 6 o'clock tomorrow night. And a lot of that moving into the low country of South Carolina. And just to the north, that's where we're seeing potentially the stronger winds. This is what's called Bulls Bay. It's in the northern portion of Charleston County. Winyah Bay is right here in Georgetown County, and it's going to move right over eastern Georgetown County, then up into Horry County by about midnight or so. So rainfall totals, well, the computer models are all over the place. 5 inches the Euro, almost 7 inches the American model GFS, the NAM 2.61, and our in-house high-resolution RPM 1.46. So there's a lot of variability, no doubt about it, but the rain chances will really ramp up for us beginning after breakfast time tomorrow and especially into the afternoon. It's going to be a messy afternoon for us as we look at that moisture content really on the increase getting into Monday evening. And then by the time Tuesday morning, we think the storm will be out of our area in terms of the center of the storm, and we'll get that offshore wind and start to dry things out a little bit. And really, Tuesday turns out to be a pretty good day. We know it's over very warm waters. There's still a slim possibility it could strengthen. Water temperatures out in the Gulf Stream 84 to 86. So here are our big concerns: high surf, rip currents, coastal flooding here in the low country, bands of heavy rain, 2 to 4 inches possible for many, and those wind gusts maybe up to 50 miles an hour or greater along the coast. Our threat board, we're also talking about rip currents. That's a big issue. We've already had some seen here today: flooding rain, wind damage, now storm surge because you've got that onshore wind flow and the high tide. A tornado risk is there. It's a very low risk, but a risk just the same. And I thought I'd end on this. I know it's probably been discussed, but Isaias is actually the replacement name for Hurricane Ike back in 2008. That name was retired. It was put into the rotation. We have 6 different lists of names that we rotate. So here we are 6 years later. After 2014, it was on the list, but we never got to it. We only had 8 named storms. So Wes, we never had to learn how to say Isaias back in 2014. We didn't get there, but certainly I think we've all learned how to say it now, and it's been a toughie, no doubt about it.
Yeah, and I think we all agree that Ike is so much easier to say than Isaias, but Ike was such a horrible storm. I'm glad that one's gone. Rob, I got to ask you, you went through a lot of stuff, and it's a lot to worry about. We're already worrying about the pandemic. I mean, how's Charleston, how's South Carolina handling the both of these? It's not easy.
Well, we kind of talked to each other before this, Wes, and I kind of relayed a story just happening tonight. I got a phone call from a lady, and she's so concerned about her mom and dad. She can't go to see them. They're in quarantine. They're elderly, and they live up in Alwindal, which is just north of Charleston, up Highway 17 north, and she's worried about them, and for obvious reasons. But because of the pandemic, because of what's going on, she can't get there to see them to make sure they're okay. And she said they don't really know much about the technology. They don't like to get on the computer. So she's got to get word. So we talked for a little while, talked her kind of through some of the alternatives that they can, just to make sure her mom and dad are safe. But that's I hate to use the word new normal, that cliche, but it is. It's something we haven't dealt with. We've dealt with hurricanes here a lot, but the pandemic on top of a hurricane, the mental anxiety, Wes, is just off the charts.
Yeah, it changes everything. And then like we've been talking about, August is the beginning of the real season. So unfortunately, we're probably going to be doing this again and talking more here on Tracking the Tropics. That is Rob Fowler. Good stuff as always, Rob. Good to see you down at WCBD in Charleston, South Carolina. Before we say goodnight, I want to update you on one more thing. This is not the strongest storm we've ever seen on the East Coast. It's going to be moving fast enough probably to prevent disastrous flooding, but it's still impacting a lot of people. And I'll finish with this. I just want to go up the East Coast about how many tropical watches and warnings we have. We'll start down here in Florida. Most of the east coast of Florida is under a tropical storm warning. Remember, these warnings and watches tell us these type of conditions could be hitting your area very soon. So tropical storm conditions, winds of 40 miles an hour and greater. We come up the coast. We just talked to Scott and Rob in Savannah and Charleston. The entire Georgia, South Carolina coast under a tropical storm warning. We come up here to North Carolina. Most of the North Carolina coast, even some inland places, could see tropical storm force winds. And then we switch over to a tropical storm watch from the northern part of North Carolina up into Virginia and Maryland. So there's just a lot going on, a lot going to be impacting from tropical storm Isaias. And for tonight, we will leave it at that. Remember, we still have a few days of this system impacting the East Coast. We will be here covering this storm with you back here Monday night at 8 o'clock on Tracking the Tropics. For Melissa, for Scott, for Rob, I'm Wes Hohenstein in Raleigh, North Carolina. Have a good night.